Welcome to Modern Farm Business Podcast. This podcast is designed to help the farm leader bring their business to the next level. We'll cover everything from leadership and finance to strategy and planning. I'm your host, Dean Hefta. Joining me today is renowned speaker, scientist, and author, Dr. Jay Lehr. He's a leading authority on groundwater hydrology and has consulted with nearly every agency in the U.S. government and many foreign governments. But his expertise is really much more broad than that, having spoken to audiences of thousands on topics ranging from global warming and biotechnology to business management and physical fitness. He's written more than 1,000 magazine and journal articles and 30 books, and is the science director at the Heartland Institute, one of the world's leading free market think tanks. Dr. Lehr, welcome to the program.
It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm looking forward to enlightening what I hope will be a broad audience to this podcast.
Yes, I'm excited for our conversation as well. So much of your experience from the scientific world intersects so perfectly with agriculture, the world of water, which is critical, obviously, for food production, and biotechnology and all of those areas. And it is very much a holistic view of the system. And so, that background that you have of not only understanding water, but that global view of food systems is really helpful. And I'd love for you to give us your perspective of maybe some of the global trends that you see that are really going to be affecting us in this whole food supply chain.
Well, they're all good. And I travel the world and probably spend 70% of my time in the agricultural space looking at food production around the world and the requirement of food of a growing population. And I'll first say that all of the fear-mongering of, let's say, 20 years ago that we couldn't feed the world have died away. We can feed our population of about 7.3 billion easily, and we'll just as easily feed a population of 9 billion, where I expect the world population will probably top out in the next 30 to 50 years. Advances in agricultural technology have increased our yields and lowered our costs. Our bigger problem in agriculture is that we are doing so well that we're looking at extremely low prices for all of our agricultural commodities, and there just is not an end in sight. So the way we will have to handle it for those making a living in agriculture as farmers is to continue to lower our costs and increase our yields through technology and better management. But there is no longer any fear of an inability to feed the world. Any starvation that exists in the world today is actually politically motivated, not being willing or able to supply adequate food supplies to people throughout the world. So all of the news about world agriculture is all positive. And so from a U.S. standpoint, we have to figure out how to keep the American farmer in the black, making a living, enjoying his work. Right now, as you well know, we're suffering from the trade wars that the government has implemented, trying to get fair trade deals with countries that we deal with across the world. I'm also optimistic on that, but there will be some short-term suffering for what I think will be long-term gains.
What are some of the areas that you're watching as far as potential future expansion of productivity? I mean, we hear about Eurasia, we hear about Africa, South America. What are some of the biggest, potential long-term competitive areas to our agricultural exports?
Well, right now it's Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, wheat in the Ukraine and Russia. We have advantages from a geographical standpoint that can never be overcome. We have 12,000 miles of contiguous rivers. Next in line would be China, Germany, and France with a couple thousand miles, so we can move our products with ease. The rest of the world that competes with us does not have an infrastructure to move their food products, so that puts them at an economic disadvantage. We also have far and away the best agricultural technology. We will always be able to stay ahead of the world, but we clearly now have a lot of competition. I don't see too much of it in Asia or Africa. They're beginning not to be self-sufficient, but doing a better job at producing crops. So collectively, we will always have competition, and we're going to have to stay ahead from a technology standpoint, from everything we do in farming. And today it's a little more in the management area even than in the technology area. But there will always be competition. We'll always stay ahead, but we clearly have to work harder today, than we did 30 or 40 years ago in terms of being the best source to feed the world.
So looking here at the U.S., you mentioned the advantage we have with our navigable waters and our rail system and our infrastructure, which is tremendous for us from a competitive standpoint. But, much of the U.S. doesn't have to irrigate, but also a significant part of our western U.S. does have to irrigate. What are some of the issues when you look out west, really from the central U.S. and west, that are going to be real challenges or things that we should be thinking about, even if we're not irrigators, when you think about access to water in agriculture?
Well, we've been making strides in irrigation. The big aquifer that runs down through the middle of the United States, we were told was going to, be drying up within 50 years. That was 50 years ago. Now they will still say it'll dry up in 50 years. But we've learned how to irrigate. We've learned how to put water on crops 10 times more efficiently than we did 30 or 40 years ago. And we're still learning. Our efficiency has increased tenfold. You will recall, 30 years ago, we were spraying water up into the air to fall on our crops in center pivot systems. Now we use drip irrigation that uses a tiny fraction of the water and to get it into the roots of the plants. We're able now to scout our plants. The advances in drone scouting has been absolutely amazing. Agriculture, the only industry that can really well use drones because the drone has to be in line of sight. It can't be over 400 feet high, and we can scout our crops eventually on a daily basis and know what crops need water and what crops do not need water. So a lack of water has always been part of fear-mongering, telling people we're going to run out of water. There's no problem in the eastern half of the United States, and there never will be. We will always have to use our water sparingly in the West and use more knowledge, but we're doing that. So there is no long-term fear that we're not going to be able to meet these requirements that we face because we have limited water in the West and not limited water in the East. So it's just a matter of knowledge, and we're applying the knowledge. And when you read an article or a headline that we're running out of water or things are desperate, it's simply not true. I mean, it's generally any headline that encourages fear in the reader is distorted tenfold.
When you look at the consumer, we shift gears to, as farmers, we're growing things for a consumer, our consumer market, whether that's energy or, feed for livestock or for the actual consumer directly. There seems to be this growing chasm, whether it's, how the media, as you point out, uses fear to kind of, have some influence over us. But this chasm between maybe what the consumer believes they want and are willing to pay for and what we understand maybe from a technology standpoint or a traditional approach to crop production, what are some of the challenges and maybe opportunities that you see in this space around that consumer-producer interaction?
Well, let me seize on the word opportunity you use and mention that our consumer economy dwarfs all other countries. The U.S. has a bigger consumer economy than the next 5 developed countries, leaving out, China with their, 1.3 billion people that they do not really serve very well. So that in agriculture, we could exist with a lot less exports because we have a population that eats better than any other, and we can get food to them. But there are anti-agriculture forces that clearly try to work against conventional agriculture. We've been faced with organic food now for a couple of decades. All the research shows there are zero advantages from a health standpoint and a nutrition standpoint eating organic food versus regular food. And it isn't particularly good for the environment because it requires far more land, and the fact that they don't use manufactured fertilizers or pesticides. They use plenty of fertilizers and pesticides. They just aren't manufactured in a factory. So there are no advantages. In fact, along that line, we have the genetic modification lies that are told. You're seeing it in the grocery store, no GM in this product, and it's ridiculous. Not a single human being on this planet has ever gotten sick eating a genetically modified food. The hoops that the manufacturers have to go through to get a grain that's been genetically modified approved run about $100 million and 10 years of effort to get through regulations of the Food and Drug Administration, EPA, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So I think the biggest thing that the average person in agriculture can do is fight back and be proactive and talk about their farms and talk about these kind of things and spread the word among people that respect them that there are no advantages to organic food at all other than it being more expensive and taking up more land, and there's no downside to genetic modification. We have a new one now we ought to be talking about is gene editing, which the people in Europe and elsewhere are trying to say, well, gene editing is a form of genetic modification. Well, it's a super advanced technique that is going to make food more nutritious and less costly in the coming decades. So there are a myriad of problems, and I think the most important thing for everybody in this audience that's involved in agriculture is to be proactive, educate themselves on the falsehoods that are told about agriculture, and take a strong position wherever you are, whoever you're talking to. People are really interested in agriculture. I mean, farming is so advanced technologically that if you get into a conversation about what you're doing on your farm, I guarantee you'll pique the interest of anybody you're talking to. I did this some years ago. I walked around San Francisco and asked people about what they knew about fertilizer, and after getting a blank stare initially, I was able to engage 90% of people I talked to in fascinating conversations about agriculture.
Yeah, and one of the tools we have now is through the internet and through social media, where we can now bring our world of farming to the city. Because, when you look demographically about the changes, we're getting more and more separated between our urban and rural realities, and we have a great opportunity here because people really want to understand about their food. They want to understand about where it comes from, and they're hungry for that. And I think that story is going to be filled by compelling and real experiences that they're able to have. And so when we can have those one-on-one conversations or tell our story online, that is more meaningful than any news story or anything like that. So that's a great point. Get the story out. Tell them your personal story. There's so many successes that we've heard from farmers being able to really engage with people that didn't really understand what their belief had been through their perceptions.
Well, the average person in agriculture is hesitant to talk about what they do, whether they're working for a company that processes food or on a technical side of agriculture, or whether they're farmers. They have a feeling that what they do is not interesting. And I can tell you from talking to tens of thousands of people over my career, once you get into it, about a minute of conversation, people are fascinated because they don't realize that today's farm is not grandfather's farm. It's not even father's farm. Our advances technologically, electronically, and all the things we do, we're at the top of the heap of technological advancement, and I guarantee you people will be interested. So we've just got to get people to understand if you talk about what you do, you're performing education that is really valuable to the whole nation.
Well, I think evidence of not only the technological advancements in farming, but the opportunity there is how much Silicon Valley venture funds and investments that you're seeing coming out.
Absolutely. Huge investment in agriculture. Of course, on one side, there's too much speculation in crops. Buying and selling has a lot to do with prices going up and down, whether we're talking about corn or soy or wheat or cotton. And that's one of the things I advise everybody. You know, if you're really good at farming, I don't think you can also be good at marketing. I mean, they're so different. And I talk to my farm audiences across the country, and I said, tell them, have a marketing advisor. There are all kinds of organizations that charge next to nothing that can use the knowledge they gain working at marketing on a 24/7 basis that can help you decide, when to store your crop, when to sell your stock, when to buy puts or calls. It's extremely complicated. I've been working at it for half a century, and I still would not act without the advice of somebody that's working at it 24/7. And I think that's part of making a living in agriculture. It's never going to be easy. I don't know any farmers that farm that don't love it. I mean, making a living off the land is spectacular. Along that line, we ought to talk a little bit about why the government helps farmers, what's different about agriculture, why they subsidize crop insurance. The public doesn't understand this. This is another message that people in agriculture need to absorb and then present to their friends and neighbors not in agriculture.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you share with people a different perspective when it comes to that involvement?
Well, farming is more subject to the vagaries of nature, which we absolutely cannot control. I usually bring in the global warming fraud that people think man controls the temperature of the planet, which is arrogance with no boundaries. Well, it's the same in farming. We can't control the weather, but we're so amazingly subject to a 200 bushel per acre corn crop turning into 50 bushels per acre with a huge change in the weather, and that's why there are minimal subsidies that help farmers. Crop insurance is my favorite one. The government subsidizes insurance somewhere in the order of 60 cents on the dollar. You don't want to cash in on the insurance any more than you want to cash in on your life insurance. But the crop insurance that the government subsidizes ensures that farmers don't go out of business, and with less farmers and less crop, then our food prices go up. So it's within the purview of the public to support the subsidy on agriculture with regard to crop insurance and a few other disaster programs that actually benefit them in the long run. And the people that, think farmers are getting money and help, welfare, so to speak, that isn't necessary is absolutely not true. The Farm Bill has been for many decades half nutrition subsidies for poorer people or people in need and only half for agriculture. That's something people have to understand.
You've dealt with, throughout your career, governments and regulations and politics and all those things, but you come from a scientific background. What's something that you just wish you could get through, whether it's here or abroad, policymakers understanding? What would you like them to understand? If you had a wand and you could help them to understand something, what do you see as a critical thing?
It's already happening. I think we've had a string of secretaries of agriculture that did not have the best interests of agriculture at heart. Tom Vilsack, our former Secretary of Agriculture under Obama, I think did an extremely poor job of representing agriculture. I am ecstatic about our new secretary, Sonny Perdue. He's a veterinarian. He grew up in an agricultural company that bought and sold grains. He, I think, is doing a phenomenal job, and he has gotten the ear of President Trump, who is extremely pro-agriculture. We've already gotten rid of a number of regulations that have impeded agriculture. The regulations, Waters of the United States was one of the worst. I mean, The past EPA wanted to take charge of every puddle on a farm if they could show that in a rain that water overflowed from the puddle into a stream, and that became a water of the United States that EPA could govern. That's over and done with. There are all kinds of rules with regard to a little bit of a diesel gasoline spill at a tank on the farm that put the farm in jeopardy. So one by one, the regulations are going away. I know most people would remember when Trump came in, he said for every new regulation his administration puts in force, they have to eliminate 2. Well, in fact, it's been a 20-to-1 ratio. For every regulation the administration has put in force, 20 have been eliminated, and a good percentage of them benefit agriculture as well as all businesses and industries in the United States. So when you talk about waving a magic wand and making things happen, as far as I'm concerned, I waved that wand on election day not quite 2 years ago, and we elected a businessman that has the best interest of every business person, including farmers at heart, rather than having crazy ideas of what the world should look like, most of which was collectivist and socialist. So it's happening right now. I've been fortunate. I was selected by Mr. Trump to provide him with the scientific support for his belief that man-caused global warming was a fraud. I was contacted by his people within weeks after his election, provided him with all kinds of information that convinced him he was right all along. My reward has been that I've been able to participate in conference calls with the White House about every other month and really talk to key people on various issues and in various departments.
Tell us a little bit about the Heartland Institute. What's your mission? What's the work that the Institute does?
Well, we're a free market think tank. Basically, our goal is to get the government out of your back pocket, out of your wallet, and we work in 4 areas: science, environment. We are the number 1 name in the world in battling the man-caused climate fraud that man controls the temperature of the planet or can do anything about it. We also work equally in education. We work on budget and tax reform and on health care. We put out 4 newspapers that go to every elected state official in the United States, just objective information about issues that they're dealing with in their states. Virtually every day, we write papers directed at particular legislation being considered in states, and those papers go to every senator and congressional representative at the state level. Virtually everybody knows us. That's our focus. We have almost all individual donations that support roughly 35 full-time employees on a budget of about $6.5 million a year. We're not rich by any means. We're often considered a shill of the oil industry. We haven't had any money from an oil company in 10 years or any major foundations. We're really driven by individual donations, and our goal is to maintain the free market in the United States.
Great. Joining me today has been renowned speaker, scientist, and author Dr. Jay Lehr. Dr. Lehr, if people want to learn more about your work or Heartland Institute work, where should they go?
The web or anything on the internet. Absolutely everything we do is there at heartland.org, and anybody can contact me at Jay Lehr, Jlehr at heartland.org if they have any questions for me. I'm delighted to respond to questions and help people understand how they can best help agriculture. And also I work heavily in the energy industry. A number of the books I've authored or co-authored or edited deal with energy. One of our areas that I'm involved in is explaining to people that if the government stopped subsidizing wind and solar, those industries would end tomorrow. About 55 cents on the dollar of all wind and solar operations are come out of our tax money. And so I'm always fighting to protect fossil fuels, which are perfectly safe. We probably have 1,000 years of them. And to deprive people of fossil fuels is to deprive less developed countries of advancing anything close to our standard of living, because it can't be done with wind and solar.
Dr. Lehr, thank you so much for your fascinating insights and experiences that you shared with us today. I appreciate it so much.
Well, my pleasure. Anytime. I'm always happy to share what I know.